this is Artifact and Landmark. This episode is about John Adams, the founder of Adams & Co., a Victorian glassworks founded in 1851 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There was much more to Adams' life than the glassworks. He was also a capitalist, a civic leader, an active member of his church, and a staunch believer in temperance. There are also a few tragedies attached to his life as well as his glassworks. I ran across this article and I think it sums up the character and life of John Adams. Iron Glass Dollar Savings Bank of Birmingham, Pittsburgh, South Side, November 9th, 1886. By the dispensation of divine providence, we are called to mourn the death of one of our most esteemed members of this board, Mr. John Adams. It can be truly said that as a Christian, he was sincere and charitable, as a citizen, patriotic and liberal, as a businessman, honorable and upright, and as a friend, true and reliable. Ripe in years, he had met life's tribulations and had conquered, and now passes on to another state of existence to receive that reward he so richly deserves. In his death, this bank loses a valuable director, and we, his associates of this board, bemoan his loss as that of a personal friend. This memorial to his memory is ordered to be entered in the records of the bank, printed in the daily papers, and a copy sent to his family. It is further ordered that this board attend the funeral in a body. Thomas B. Atterbury, President. Henry Stamps, Secretary. If you are a glass collector, you may recognize Thomas B. Atterbury, who, like many businessmen of the day, led both the bank as well as the glassworks of Atterbury and Company. He would also be one of the pallbearers at John Adams' funeral. So John Adams was born in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania on February 15, 1823. At 14 years old, Adams joined Bakewell Pears & Co., a Pittsburgh glass manufacturer. So in April 1845, a fire spread quickly and fiercely throughout the borough of Pittsburgh. It destroyed the home and works of Thomas Bakewell, which is, of course, Adams' employer. So we have a painting here from a longtime resident of Pittsburgh, an artist, William C. Wall, that he painted right after this fire. And it shows the extent of damage. And we've pointed out here the Bakewell glass house and the amount of damage it sustained. So we're not sure if this fire and the destruction of the works is the reason why makes his next decision to move. After his apprenticeship ends in 1846, he moved to St. Louis and joined the new glassworks of Nelson, Eads, and Robbins. The main force behind this works was James B. Eads, and I'm sure he made quite the impression on the young Adams. Before starting the glassworks, Eads was in the business of salvaging ships and cargo in the rivers under the partnership of Case, Nelson, and Eads, and was very successful. At about that time, in 1846, John Adams would have been about 23 years old and recently married. His wife, Mary Ann Howe, was born on March 21st, 1825 in Washington, Pennsylvania. Their first son, John, would be born the next year in about 1847. Unfortunately, the glassworks partnership wasn't a success, and one reason was that they couldn't get enough lead. So John Adams, being ever inventive, began to experiment with lime as a good substitute for lead. He was able to produce the first lime glass in Missouri during this time, and then Adams returned to Pittsburgh and Eads rejoined the salvage business in about 1848. When Adams returned to Pittsburgh, he first joined the glassworks of William McCauley & Co., where he learned to blow bottles. He also worked for S. McKee & Co., which, if you watched that video, that focused on window glass bottles and jars. By this time, Adams had saved $500 and decided to go into partnership with Joseph Roseman in the style of Adam, Roseman & Co. It advertised itself as the Bohemian Glassworks. The works would have been at the intersection of Ross and Water Streets in Pittsburgh. Adams would have been 28 and Joseph Roseman would have been 30. By the time Adams starts this new partnership, his family would have grown to include two more sons. The first is William, born in 1849, and the other one is Adolphus Augustus, born in 1851. These two sons would eventually join the glassworks in 1875. The initial partnership of Adams and Roseman would only last until about 1854, when Adams takes on a new partner, which is Thomas Macklin, who's a grocer. Macklin unfortunately soon passes from cholera during the outbreak of this infection in September of 1854. Macklin is buried in Allegheny Cemetery along his son, who dies unfortunately at the age of 5, and his brother, who died at the age of 30 from tuberculosis. By 1857, the glassworks goes bankrupt, and Adams eventually comes to an agreement with two of his major creditors, Alexander King and Michael McCullough. Both are wholesale grocers at the time, and King was actually also a supplier of soda ash, a main ingredient for glass production. The business continues under the name of Adams, Macklin & Co. until it's moved to the South Side a few years later. They also continue to market their fruit jars. We also see Adams continue to perfect his lime glass recipe, but he wasn't the only one. We know that both Adams and William Phillips of Phillips and Best, also of Pittsburgh, were working with lime glass in the 1850s. And part of this evidence comes from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reporting on the goods that arrived by river in 1859. A shipment arrives from Wheeling in February of 1859 and includes 30 barrels of lime for Adams & Co. and 50 barrels of lime for Phillips and Best. In 1860, William Layton of Hobbs Glass would be credited with a new recipe that substitutes soda ash with sodium bicarbonate, making the lime glass lighter in weight, along with other advantages. Some would argue that Adams' own glass formula is said to have changed the glass industry, and this may be one reason why Pittsburgh grew to dominate the glass industry in the following decades. In 1858, ever inventive, we see a patent for a molded glass washboard by John Adams. In 1860, John Adams is now 37 years old, and the census indicates that by this time his first son John has unfortunately passed, but we also see new additions to his family, his first daughter Anna. In that year, we also see some major changes to his business. He moves the works to the South Side, with the original works in Pittsburgh being sold off and torn down. With this move, we see John's family expanding and him taking on new civic and business responsibilities. In 1862, we see Alexander King part ways with Adams, forming his own glassworks of King & Co. That same year, we see Adams get a new patent for improvements in fruit jars. After the Civil War in 1866, we see that John is leading the Birmingham City Council Committee for the new Lincoln Hose Company, which is essentially the fire company. Using fire hoses was actually fairly innovative, at least in Pittsburgh. And what it was replacing were these long bucket lines where they essentially filled buckets with water to put out the fires. They estimated their hose carriage would be about $700, and they would require a 1,000-foot hose. In 1867, we see his partners William and Joseph Doyle leave the partnership to form their own glassworks of Doyle & Co. And their works will be right next door, as you can see on this map. With these departures, next year we see a new arrival into the partnership, and this time it's George F. Easton. He would have been about 37 years old, and he will remain with the firm until it's sold off to U.S. Glass. In 1869, we see Adams taking an interest in railways, specifically the Ormsby Passenger Railway, which ran into some issues when trying to get incorporated, but never wanted to give up. In 1870, we see the line incorporated with initial shares of 8,000 at $35 per share. That year, we also see him leading the Temperance and Reform Party, what becomes the Reform Republicans of the South Side. They aimed to essentially put new leadership in power to solve what they viewed as mismanagement of taxpayer dollars, but obviously part of his concerns was also intemperance. By 1870, John is now 47, and his family has grown to include 3 additional daughters, Jenny, Maggie, and Nettie. His family now includes 2 sons and 4 daughters. In 1872, we see John Adams elected as director of the Iron and Glass Dollar Savings Bank, and he would be associated with this bank for the remainder of his life. That year in 1872, we also see Birmingham, along with 10 other boroughs, annexed into Pittsburgh. With that, on November 4th, John Adams is elected along with George Duncan as council members for the newly created 28th Ward of Pittsburgh. Adams is also selected to speak on behalf of the annexed boroughs during the grand ceremony, and this is what he had to say. Permit us to thank you for your kind words and hearty greeting. I wish the task of responding had been assigned to someone better able, but you must take the feelings of the heart rather than our words. We can scarcely realize now that we have ever been outside of Pittsburgh. So intimately associated have we been. It is only a few years since many of us played together on the grassy slopes and timber-covered hillsides of the South Side. where now we find the innumerable manufactories and dwellings referred to by the president of the Common Council. We appreciate the privilege of being called Pittsburghers and are glad to come under such favorable auspices. We represent over 30,000 people, most of whom have earned their own homes or hewn their own fortunes by honest toil. The annual product of our factories exceeds 40 million, and we pay in wages 10 million annually. We manufacture one half of all the glass consumed in the country, and our iron production is immense. We anticipate a still further increase in both glass and iron. In a few years, we expect to cover hilltops with dense population. All we ask now under consolidation is a fair chance, and we hope to so expand and prosper as to make the South Side wards a valuable portion of the city. Allow me once more, on behalf of my fellow members, to thank you for your very cordial reception. Unfortunately, there were challenges for John Adams. In 1873, we see the first of many fires that will cause significant damage to his glassworks. This one in 1873 was located at their warehouse, and Adams believes it was actually arson. The company will experience other major fires in 1884 and 1887, both of which will actually occur at the rented works of Challoner, Hogan and Co. And now in 1874, ever being civic minded, and although this may appear insignificant, we do see Adams involved in his community, joining a committee to improve postal delivery to the South Side. A group's formed, and they go to Washington, D.C. to demand that better postal service. In 1874, we also see another partner leave. This time it's Peter Kunzler, who at the time sells off 15 lots on the South Side to John Adams and others for $22,000, which after some digging, we believe these lots property operated by Adams and Co. But again, with the departure of Kunzler, we see some new partners arriving in 1875. These include his two sons, William and Adolphus, along with James Dazzle. These additions would have helped Adams to take on yet another role. He will help to form and lead the Western Flint and Lime Glass Protective Association, which was established for the industry to help control pricing, discounts, and credit. It also helped to address issues that were a common concern to the glassworks, such as tariffs. John Adams was elected the first president and served as president for many years. An example of how they pooled their resources is found very soon after this for the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, which ran from May 10th to November 10th, 1876. We see the members sharing a space to exhibit their wares. The showcase and it's reported that their showcase cost $12,000, which is over $300,000 in today's money. The display itself was 90 feet long, 6 feet deep, and 14 feet high. If you collect glass, these glassworks will be very familiar to you, especially if you collect EAPG or early American pressed glass. The impact that Adams had on this organization is actually best seen through a tribute published at his passing, which we'll share at the end. So John Adams' piety was very well known during his lifetime. Although Adams and Co. were exhibiting at the Centennial Exposition, we also see him lead a meeting on the South Side to pass a resolution to support keeping the exposition closed on Sundays to observe the Sabbath. This resolution is passed on to the Exposition Committee just to show their support. You can also imagine, based on what I've already said, that he was noted to regularly be involved with the Southside Methodist Church and its Sunday school. So in 1877, a quick number of events happened, but we think this may have been the result of an important event that occurs in 1876. That year, we see the death of John Malone, one of the partners' wives, Mary Ann Reed Malone. She dies at the age of 39, leaving Malone and 5 young children. And so let's go over these events, and maybe you can comment and let me know what you think. The first event is in 1877 when George Easton sells 1/4 interest of the lots and firm for $5,000 back into the partnership on July 7th. 1 week later, on July 14th, 1877, John Malone leaves the firm selling his interest. And after this, it seems Malone's life spirals out of control. On July 26th, Malone is declared a habitual drunkard by a sheriff's jury, and a trustee is appointed for his estate. A guardian for his children is also appointed. The guardian would have been Terence Campbell Jr. of Duncan Campbell & Co., another window glass manufacturer. After Malone's dramatic and sad departure, Adams & Co.'s partnership would include John, his sons Augustus and William, along with James Dazzle, and his long-term partners George F. Easton and Gottfried Miller. We know that the business is doing well, with earnings about $144,000 for the previous year, which was double the revenue of other glassworks, including Duncan & Sons and Ripley & Co. In 1878, John Adams is picked to replace the president of the Castle Shannon Railway. The railway would run from a suburb of Pittsburgh called Castle Shannon to the south side. It was created to haul in coal from Castle Shannon into the south side. It later added passenger service that would run during the day, and the coal loads would be transported at night. We know a few of Adams Co.'s employees did live in Castle Shannon at this time and may have actually taken advantage of this rail line. Here we just marked Castle Shannon and where the railway would have terminated on the south side of Pittsburgh. This map is from 1894. That year, in 1878, Adams also becomes a director of the Southside Cemetery Association, which is where you'll find the family plot. The cemetery had only recently opened in 1873. Adams would also hold other roles, such as the director for the Monongahela Water Company and the Southside Gas Company. In 1880, Adams and his family moved to a large estate in Hazelwood on 2nd Avenue. His homes were really modest up until this point, and with his last address at 904 Bingham on the south side. Tragically, in 1883, John Adams suffers the loss of his daughter Maggie. She passes at the age of 17, and a very sweet inscription is on her headstone. It reads, "None knew her but to love." His partner James Dazzle also leaves the firm in that same year of 1883 to form Dazzle Brothers and Gilmore. Sadly, James would pass away at a very young age of only 39. In January 1885, Adams suffers a broken hand when he falls off a streetcar in New York, which is interesting given his next project in June 1885. Adams becomes involved with trying to fund a new hospital in the south side of Pittsburgh. This comes after a citizens' meeting to encourage the building of this new hospital to help respond to the many factory injuries that would have better outcomes if they were treated more quickly. Adams does become a board member of the Southside Hospital, and he does try to raise the $15,000 needed, but falls short of raising the funds, raising about $6,000. Unfortunately, it would take many years for a hospital to be built. Although accidents were frequent in factories during this Victorian era, the addition of gas in the manufacturing process and the inexperience of how to manage it would actually lead to many injuries. And we see one of these in 1886. An accident at the factory seriously injures his long-term partner, Gottfried Miller. He's badly burnt while lighting the gas furnaces after cleaning out the well. Sadly, that same year, towards the end of that year, on November 7th, 1886, after a long and productive life, we see the passing of John Adams, the founder and namesake of this company. His cause of death is surprisingly jaundice, and he's 63 years old. With his death, we see an outpouring from the community, both at his funeral and through the press. We recounted the Iron Glass Dollar Savings Bank Memoriam. Now we'll share the following from the Western Flint and Lime Glass Productive Association. So this article has a date on of November 8, 1886, and it's coming at a special meeting of the Western and Flint Lime Glass Productive Association held this day. The following was offered and unanimously adopted. And among the members of this association, the loss of no one will be more sorely felt or sore regretted than Mr. John Adams of Adams & Co., who died on the Sabbath morning, the 7th instance, in his 64th year of his age, after a long and lingering illness. One of the founders, and ever taking a leading part, none will be more, and few so much missed. He was almost continuously a member of the executive committee, and for many years its honored president. Prompt and regular in his attendance at its meetings, wise and judicious in his counsels, progressive yet conservative in his views, subordinating personal preferences to the general good, ever ready to make sacrifices for the sake of harmony. It is no disparagement to others to say that Mr. Adams, more than any other one man, is due credit for the prosperous condition and influential position of the association today. His interest in the Association of Manufacturers for the general good was shown long prior to the organization of the present association, his name appearing in the minutes of the National Convention held in 1863 and several subsequent years. He was also one of the promoters of the present National Association, organized in 1880, in which he held a prominent and influential position. Mr. Adams has been identified with the glass business for almost a half a century, having entered the factory of Bakewell's as an apprentice in 1837. In 1851, he embarked in the manufacture of glassware on his own account and continued in it until his death, and by his energy and perseverance, built it up and left to his successors a large establishment and prosperous business. He was a member of the Bingham Street Methodist Church on the south side, in the general work of which he always took an active part. Deeply sensible of the loss, would not be unmindful of the still greater loss sustained by those connected by more endearing ties, to whom is extended sincerest sympathies in this hour of deep sorrow, and commend them to Him who alone can administer healing to bruised hearts. Just to drive home how much this man was appreciated, there's also a few articles again about his funeral, and I'll recount a few here. So not only was his funeral attended by a large group of people, but the service was not only led by Reverend Dr. C.A. Holmes, but also supported by 5 other reverends. So first we're going to cover the one that's a bit upbeat, and this is about the floral arrangements, which must have been spectacular. Title of the article is Rare Floral Designs. The floral decorations for the funeral of the late John Adams of the firm J. Adams & Co. Glass Manufacturers, Carson Street, Southside, were completed yesterday by B.A. Elliott. Among others was a lamp about 5 feet high given by the partners of the deceased gentleman, which was superb in the tasteful display of beautiful flowers of the season and suggestive as a symbol of departed life. The finest decoration, however, was a glass house about 6 feet long and to the top of the smokestacks about 5 feet high. This was all made out of the rarest and most exquisite flowers. It was executed at the order of the employees of the glass factory, of which the late Mr. John Adams had been for so many years a distinguished head. The next one is a bit gloomy. The title of this one is A Weird Scene. The interment of the late John Adams by lamplight. The funeral services over the remains of the late John Adams, the glass manufacturers, were held yesterday afternoon at the Bingham Street Methodist Church. The service began at 3 o'clock and were conducted by Dr. C.A. Holmes, President Elder of the Pittsburgh District, assisted by Reverend Mr. Beacon, Mr. J.J. McMyer, Reverend O.A. Riley, Reverend Miller, and Reverend L. McGuire. 2 hours were occupied, and it was after 5 o'clock when the funeral cortege left the church. Darkness overtook the procession, and by the time the Southside Cemetery was reached, a drizzling rain added to the dreariness of the occasions. Lanterns were brought into the requisition, and the pale light shed over the forms and faces of those about the grave, the coffin lowering into the grave, the drizzling rain, and the solemn aspect of all made up a weird and awe-inspiring scene. The services at the grave were brief, owing to the lateness of the hour, yet it was 7 o'clock before the first carriage got started from the place of interment. Delay was occasioned by the great number of carriages, over 100 following the remains from Hazelwood to the church, and by the great length of the service at the church. 2 o'clock was the time set for the church service to begin, but it was 3 o'clock before the procession arrived. The pallbearers were Jenkins Jones, Robert Bryce from the glassworks of Bryce Brothers, Thomas B. Atterbury from the glassworks of Atterbury & Co., Allen M. Hammett, a window glass cutter at S. McKee & Co., and a member of the Southside Methodist Church, Captain Robinson, David Challoner from the glassworks of Challoner, Hogan & Co., and James M. Bailey, who is widely known as a capitalist and industrialist across iron, coal, also involved in the Castle Shannon Railway. After his passing, we see Adams & Co. being sold in 1891 to U.S. Glass. Adams' wife herself will soon pass in 1887, and they'll leave two sons. William was born September 12th, 1849. He marries Clara Bentley in 1875. They have one child, John Elmer. As you know, William would work for Adams & Co. A tragic event does touch William's life in 1889. Unfortunately, their son Elmer stabs a schoolmate, Joe Stevenson, on the south side of Pittsburgh. This was after a quarrel between the two boys. It's said that no arrests or charges were brought against Elmer, but soon after this, in 1890, William's wife Clara deserts him. He seeks and is granted a divorce in 1892, and you can imagine that these events may be related. William never remarries. He lives for a time with his sister Anna after her husband becomes an invalid, and he dies on June 3rd, 1916. He's laid to rest in the family plot in the Southside Cemetery in Pittsburgh. The second son, Adolphus, is born on September 2, 1851. He marries Martha Parnell in about 1896. Of course, he also works for Adams & Co. And then after the sale of the company, he becomes a stockbroker, and he does this for decades, carrying on the business until a few months before his death. He was a member of the Franklin Society and is noted to present papers on many subjects, including alcohol and tobacco abstinence, which I think he's tipping his hat to his father in this case, taking on his ideas. He also becomes president of the Southside Cemetery, where he is also laid to rest. He passes on October 5th, 1926. In addition to these two sons, we also have three daughters. Anna, the eldest daughter, was born in about April 1860 and marries Charles H.A. Deans. They have 6 children who survive into adulthood. We know that William, her brother, is living with Anna again in about 1910, which is around the time that her husband does become an invalid. We find Charles at the Dixon State Hospital in Kilbuck Township, PA, in the census of 1910 and 1920. Anna will pass away May 16, 1931, and is also found in the family plot in the Southside Cemetery. Jenny, the second eldest daughter, was born April 5th, 1863, but some documents note her to be born in 1865. She would spend 25 years as a missionary for the Women's Foreign Missionary Society of the Methodist Church, starting in about 1900. Most of her work was carried out in Fuzhou, China. She passes in 1921. After her passing, one article reports that she put her inheritance of $2 million towards her missionary work, including building an old age home in China. Nettie, the youngest daughter, was born February 18, 1869. She first marries Harry D. Clemens, who is a distant relative of Mark Twain, in 1889. She divorces him and then marries John S. Wilson in 1894. They would have 2 children, a son, John Flynn Wilson, who unfortunately dies young in 1923, and a daughter, Helen Wilson Dorrit Schuster. Nettie passes in 1963. So that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about John Adams, his work, and his family. And subscribe if you want to find out more about additional American glassworks and their founders.